can I give you one team that I think would be interesting in a trade for Metcalf? I think that Green Bay would be an interesting spot because they need a wide receiver really bad, someone that they can trust.
We're back with Football Forecast Offseason Show, Episode 3. We got a lot to get into. He's Nick Morgasen. I know you're used to seeing Kaynen Buckshot. He's not going to be on this episode. We do got Nick Morgasen, who is a familiar face who you guys are used to seeing on Football Forecast. So he's going to come in this week and bring his football expertise as well. I'm Anthony Balester, and we got a lot to get into. Like I said, we had trades this week. We had cuts. We had contract extensions. So we also had a lot more. Make sure that you're following the Football Forecast on all social medias at TFB Forecast ETB. Also be making sure to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Make sure to follow the Empty the Bench Podcast Network on all social medias on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter at ETB Network. Also, make sure to be following our YouTube channel at youtube.com/ETB Network for all of our other shows, including MMA shows, baseball shows, whatever sport you like, we definitely got it. Also, make sure to listen to the Football Forecast wherever you get your podcasts, whether you listen to them to on the go or you watch them on your TV. Also, make sure to subscribe to our new ETB Network Substack. We have a lot of great new things that are being introduced each and every week. Like I said, we do all sports. So definitely make sure to subscribe into that. And the Football Forecast is presented by Playback. Also, make sure you stay tuned for Playback for more information on that. We have a lot to get into, Nick. We had, players demanding trades like DK Metcalf, Trey Hendrickson, guys like Saquon Barkley, finally getting done right and getting a huge contract extension that was definitely deserved. We had some people, unfortunately, getting cut, like your boy Davante Adams in New York, and we had Joey Bosa. So we have a lot to get into, Nick. But first, how are you doing?
I'm good, man. It's weird being on the other side of the lead table here, but no, I'm looking forward to this. I'm glad we brought this Football Forecast Offseason show, and I think we've been very lucky the first couple of episodes because we have no idea what to expect in the NFL offseason. Sometimes it's empty, and you have to find news and fish it out. We haven't had to do that yet.
No, it's been breaking news after week, and what's crazy is it's only going to get more insane because free agency hasn't even really got going yet. We got that coming up next week, so that's going to give us a lot more stories. But let's get right into it, Nick. This is something that we definitely talked about earlier this week, but we got to talk about it again. We got Deebo Samuel, who was traded to the Washington Commanders. Now, like we said, it looked like, the Commanders are going all in to try to help Jaden Daniels. Now he's got two number one great receivers. And the 49ers now are trying to get some salary cap relief and trying to go younger at the position. Ultimately, it looks like they're trying to just release some cap for the Brock Purdy contract. But what are your thoughts about this, Nick?
Yeah, I think you said it exactly right. I think this has to do with the cap for Brock Purdy. I think the Niners are going kind of through a partial rebuilding phase. I don't think they're going to go full rebuild because they still like a lot of the pieces they have, whether it's with Jennings or if they can get Ayuk back from injury. That's a big if he really wants to be in a Niners uniform. But Deebo, I think, was kind of getting frustrated in a Niners uniform because they were so close for quite a few years, so close, and they just could not get over the hump. The Chiefs, obviously, they ran into the Chiefs a few times. Now, could they be kicking themselves that they had a down year and the Chiefs ended up losing really bad? I don't know. But Deebo brought a huge asset to this franchise. And a lot of people take that for granted, that obviously he could catch passes. But believe it or not, I think the percentages were higher that they were using him for screenplays and rushes. And would you say they were using him more in the run game than anybody else almost?
Yeah, his versatility is what made him so valuable. And, if you think about him as just a straight wide receiver, Brandon Ayuk is probably the better receiver. But if you add in his versatility, you're not going to line up Brandon Ayuk at running back. You're not going to do the same screenplays that you do with Deebo because Deebo was just so strong and explosive. And he's really good run after catch. And he's really a hard guy to bring down. Brandon Ayuk is more of just a guy who could go out there, run great routes, get open, and just be a straight-up receiver. So it's interesting that they chose to get rid of Deebo over Ayuk. I know why Ayuk's making a lot more money, so maybe he's a tougher player to trade. He's also coming off of injury, but he is 3 years younger. Now, my question is, with Ayuk, is he going to be next? Is this team going to go full rebuild at the receiver position, go with Purcell and Jennings as the two guys, and are they going to trade Ayuk as well? I think that would be a tough ask, and I know Brock Purdy has proved he can win, but if you take out both his top receivers, Deebo Samuel and Ayuk, and if McCaffrey's hurt, I'm not sure if Brock Purdy could have the same success.
Yeah, I don't really buy the 49ers right now. Like, I know, like we said, they have a lot of really good pieces. They have veteran experience on their coaching staff. They have really good ownership. They have a good front office, but they don't all play together in camaraderie and chemistry. And that's why they're not winning the big games when they need to win the big games. Now, the 49ers have to decide, besides making this trade, are they going to pay market value for Brock Purdy? I think that's more the big question they got to get to the bottom of. And if they feel that Brock Purdy is not worth market value, then they're going to be without a quarterback. That's a whole nother issue, because I forgot who we might have been discussing this at one point also, that I think he's worth $20 to $30 million in value. But if you look at the ridiculous contracts, I think you and I talked about this on ETV earlier in the week, that if other guys like Trevor Lawrence, who are making $55 million and haven't done a damn thing in the playoffs yet, then what do you think Brock is going to say? Hey, I've won a playoff game. We made it to a championship game. I should be paid more than Trevor Lawrence. And he's probably right if that's the case. But the Niners are not going to spend $55 million a year on Brock. I can tell you that right now. They'll let him walk if he's going to ask for $55 million, because they need that rest of that money to tool back up. Their defense was a struggle last year also. Was it Trent Williams who got hurt also? And that was a massive blow to their defensive line. So they have a lot of questions to answer.
Yeah, they definitely do. And I know the salary cap going up obviously assisted them with the Brock Purdy contract. But, if you look at a guy like Tua Tagovailoa, who's making in the low 50s. Now, I like Tua Tagovailoa, and I do think he's probably a more talented quarterback, but how much more talented is he than Brock Purdy? I mean, Brock Purdy is known for his accuracy just like Tua is. You got to have a good team around both those quarterbacks for them to succeed, and Tua doesn't have a playoff win. So, I mean, Brock Purdy's definitely him and his agent definitely got to be asking for somewhere in the 40s and 50s. But like you said, Nick, there's no way the 49ers are going to pay that, knowing that they could get another guy that could come in for 20, 30 and pretty much have similar success. So the 49ers are in a tough position. You're already giving McCaffrey an average annual salary of $19 million.
And he's hurt.
I think Ayuk's in the 30s. He's hurt. And now if you're going to have to give Brock Purdy $40 or $50 million, you're pretty much only going to be able to have those three players. Now, I know Brock Purdy's contract will kick in after McCaffrey's contract will kick in, but you're still paying Nick Bosa and you're still paying other players as well. So, I mean, the 49ers are in a tough position, but the team that's not in a tough position is the Commanders, and they seem like a team that's only going to improve on what they did last season. And, I know the Eagles are in their division, but they're definitely a team you're going to have to respect and look out for, and they're going to be contending for the whole thing next year again.
I think it's incredible. Finally, the Commanders get I wouldn't say it's a perfect wide receiver combination. Let me be clear about that first, because obviously, and they could use him as a running back and do the same thing in Washington. So that actually makes them more durable from a running position and a wide receiver position. And that actually might open up Jaden Daniels to run more times down the field, which he likes using his legs so much. So this is actually a dual threat value move, because it helps Jaden Daniels from a receiver standpoint and a running standpoint, and it opens up the field for more options. So this is a win-win situation for the Commanders.
Yeah, it puts the Commanders in a pick your poison. Do you want Brian Robinson to run on it? Do you want Jaden Daniels to run on you? Or do you want Deebo Samuel? Or if you want to take out the run, then we can hit you deep with Terry McLaurin, or we can hit you deep with Deebo Samuel as well. So the Commanders are going to be a tough team to beat. Another team who has a rookie quarterback who's trying to improve their team as well, the Chicago Bears. Chicago Bears went out and traded for a guard, Joe Thuney. Now, we know Caleb Williams was kind of running for his life. The Bears were supposed to have at least, maybe not a great offensive line, but at least a above average offensive line. And it didn't really look like that last season. And I know Caleb Williams didn't have a great offensive scheme. And, those receivers weren't, again, schemed the right way to get open. But Jaden Daniels was kind of running for his life. So I think this trade makes a lot of sense. What are your thoughts about this, Nick?
So the Bears have struggled. And like we were talking about, if you watch Bears football, and Zan and Grant, if you're watching, I'm sorry you had to watch Bears football most of this past year. But they could not keep Caleb Williams on his feet. They could just not do it. And it was forcing him to make bad throws. It was forcing him to throw way more interceptions probably than he had to. If he actually had time to do a 4-count, 5-count, he didn't even have time to do that at times because they would say, all right, 1 option, 2 option, 3 option. By the time he was looking at the second option, he was getting killed in the pocket. So hopefully bringing in an all-pro offensive lineman is going to kind of help spread the line out a little bit more and allow him to actually have a few extra seconds to throw the football. Because the guy throws the football much better than people give his reputation for. Is he a legs guy first? Yes. That's what a lot of today's quarterbacks are. They want to run out of the pocket. But you have to be able to throw the football in the NFL. You won't survive as a good quarterback if you can't throw the football. So having this move only helps the line get better.
And the thing is, Caleb Williams, like you said, can throw the football. I think what he does is he doesn't use his legs to kind of like escape the pocket to necessarily run for rushing yards. He likes to stay in the pocket, but consistently running back and forth in the pocket for a receiver to get open. I think if you get a good offensive coach that can come in which now they have Ben Johnson, who could kind of scheme your receivers open, he doesn't have to spend as much time running around for guys to get open. And also, too, now he has the added protection. Now, I know when you got a quarterback who's running like that, even if you have good offensive linemen, it's hard to protect. I think Caleb Williams will try to fix that, try to speed up his clock, and it's normal for a rookie quarterback. For the Kansas City Chiefs, I mean, it basically shows you that they had to choose one or the other. They either had to keep Trey Smith or they had to keep Joe Thuney. Now, it sucks for the Chiefs because they struggle at tackle. But what they were great at was the interior offensive line were Creed Humphreys, Joe Thuney, and Trey Smith. Now, because of how bad their tackle was, they had to move Joe Thuney to tackle last season, but ultimately he's a guard. And now what sucks is because Trey Smith, who's a free agent, he had the franchise tag him, and because of all the money you're paying other players like Chris Jones and Pat Mahomes, you kind of basically had to choose one or the other. And Trey Smith's the younger guy, so it makes more sense. So because you franchise tag Trey Smith, you had to lose Joe Thuney. So now now that the Chiefs not only need tackles, now the Chiefs are going to need an offensive guard. So the Chiefs, it's going to be a tough offseason. I know it's good that they got Trey Smith and Kelsey back, but to lose an all-pro guard at an offensive line that was already struggling in the Super Bowl, the Chiefs are going to have a lot of positions that they're going to have to draft this upcoming draft.
Also, don't forget Kelsey not retiring either. That also adds to their salary cap. I don't know what his number was. I kind of forgot what his number was off the top of my head, but it was not a small number from what I understood. So that also adds to the cap issue. The Chiefs have cap issues. That's part of the reason why they had to make this trade. And the Bears were the beneficiary of that trade because they're over the cap because of Mahomes' contract. And they won their few Super Bowls, but now they're going to get handcuffed by his contract because as the cap continues to be an issue, they're going to have to basically lop off parts that they can't afford. So I guess the Bears got their gain in this scenario.
Yeah, thank God Andy Reid and the Chiefs typically draft well. I mean, we saw when they lost Tyreek Hill a few years ago, they were able to draft and build up their defense pretty quickly. Now, like I said, this is going to be another transitional period where I think they're going to have to draft and completely rebuild their offensive line. And like I said, all those great players that they drafted over the last 3 years are all coming up for contracts. So I guess that's the curse when you're a team that drafts well is that eventually you got to pay these guys. But if you keep drafting well, you can keep replacing them. We also had another guy who didn't get traded, but he requested a trade. So after Tyler Lockett was released by the Seattle Seahawks, DK Metcalf requested a trade. Now they're saying that the request of the trade is not necessarily tied to each other, but what the reports are saying is that DK Metcalf wants to go to a contender. And the Seahawks are really pissed off about this, not because DK Metcalf requested a trade, but because he chose the timing to do it immediately after he found out about the Tyler Lockett release. And the Seattle Seahawks are really upset about the fact that he chose the timing of the fact that you just released one of your other starting receivers, and now your other starting receiver is going to demand a trade. Now, I know the Seahawks, for the fact of Metcalf wanting to demand a trade, he must not have much faith in this team competing next season. And it goes to show you, is this team on a potential to where they might have to go into another rebuild? I mean, Geno Smith, played okay, but not necessarily great last year. He's not getting any younger. Obviously, you just got rid of Lockett. You do have Jackson Smith-Njigba, who I think has become their number one receiver. And I think that's allowed the Seattle Seahawks to cut Lockett and be so open to trading Metcalf. But what are your thoughts about this, Nick?
Seattle has a lot of problems. They have a lot of problems they got to figure out. I have a lot of growing pains on Geno Smith just from being a Jet fan. So I'm almost a little too close to this situation. But DK Metcalf is a really good wide receiver that doesn't get enough attention because he's in Seattle, and Seattle doesn't make a lot of runs to the playoffs, or not that this can exist anymore. When there were 16 games, they were a 500 team. That's basically how they finished every year. Maybe they would go 10-6, or they would go 8-8, and they would just squeak into the playoffs, and then they would get eliminated in wild card weekend or whatever round they made. But DK Metcalf is a really good wide receiver. Now, there is reports that he's looking for $30 million a year. First of all, I don't think any wide receiver is going to get $30 million a year. I think that's just an insane number for any wide receiver. They're talking about, not that we were going to talk about this, but with the Bengals, the wide receiver.
Well, you got Jefferson making 35, and I think last year Chase proved that he's the best receiver. So I think Chase wants 36 to 40.
Which, that's right. So Jamar Chase, his agent, I think, came out and said they want to reset the wide receiver market, which I just don't see any team paying close to $40 million a year for a wide receiver. But at $30 million, it's a lot. Some team will desperately trade for DK Metcalf. Don't you worry. DK Metcalf will have a team, whether it's Seattle or somewhere else, that now you're going to see all the playoff contenders be in on DK Metcalf because this guy is a game changer on the field. But Seattle's just not a good team right now. That's the nicest way I can really put it. You said it. They have a lot of really good pieces. I like Smith-Njigba. I think he's a really good player. I like Tyler Lockett. Tyler Lockett was a really good player for many years, and then he gets cut. And I think more of that just has to do with cap space. Not that he's a bad player, but teams this offseason, if you notice a trend, are cutting guys that you don't normally think would be cut to make cap space, right?
Yeah, it's definitely starting to become a trend. And I think it's because there's so many, especially at receivers, there's so many great young receivers that's been coming in the NFL that, when you get a receiver who's starting to get into his 30s, you kind of got to start letting those guys go. And like I said, I think it has to do with the emergence of Jackson Smith-Njigba. And ultimately, I don't think Seattle wants to lose DK Metcalf. I think they want to build their offense around Metcalf and Smith-Njigba. Two young receivers that are number one receivers in this league. But the thing is, you can't afford to give Metcalf $30 million because you're going to have to get Jackson Smith-Njigba $25+ million in about a year or two. So you can't afford two guys at that price. So it's just unfortunate that they basically are going to have to choose Smith-Njigba over Metcalf. But it makes sense, though, because I'm not sure if I'd give Metcalf $30 million. I think he's more close to around the $25 million mark than the 30 mark. But you got Jackson Smith-Njigba, who, like I said, had become their best receiver last season. So you're going to have to build your offense around him. But this team, even it sucks because you got guys like Devin Witherspoon, you got Tyreek Woolen on defense. They have a lot of good pieces, like you said. But if Geno Smith keeps getting older and he starts to decline, and now you got rid of Lockett and Metcalf, this team might have to go into a rebuild sooner rather than later.
But if you just look at the contract of Geno Smith, that's the biggest problem here. So he's making 3 years, $75 million, making $25 million a year for a guy that's not. Would you agree with me? He's not worth $25 million a year. I don't think he is. I even would say Brock is of better value than Geno Smith currently. Now, we'll see what happens, but they might have to move off of Geno, really, to be honest, because that's part of what's holding them back. They need a quarterback and not like backup quarterbacks like Drew Lock and all these weird guys that they keep bringing in to try to soften the position rather than find somebody long term. Seattle has not been good at the quarterback position. Can we admit that they just can't find the right guy for long term?
Well, they had Russell Wilson for about a decade, but then after that, like you had Geno Smith, who had the one good year, and then he had kind of just a decent year, but not a year where it's going to warrant that contract. And honestly, what Seattle probably should do at this point is, trade Metcalf, they said they want a first and a third round pick. I don't think they're going to get that. They probably can get a first, but I don't think they'll get a first and a third. But you get a first round pick for Metcalf. And then I know it's not a strong quarterback class. So what you do is you draft other positions and then you get your quarterback in 2026. And I know fans don't want to hear this, but you sacrifice 1 year. You have one bad season in Seattle. Now next year in 2026, you get your franchise quarterback to pair up for the next decade with Jackson Smith-Njigba and Kenneth Walker and those great players on defense. I think that's what makes the most sense and trying to put in this win now mode this year.
Can I give you one team that I think would be interesting in a trade for Metcalf? I think that Green Bay would be an interesting spot because they need a wide receiver really bad, someone that they can trust. Because if you look at their receiver room right now, it's either hurt or not trustworthy whatsoever. And Jordan Love has no one really to throw the football to. You have one of the best or the best running back that you got from the Raiders in Jacobs, and you need a wide receiver to complement it. I think Metcalf, that would be a perfect scenario, I think, with Jordan Love in Green Bay.
Yeah, I absolutely love it. And when I look at Green Bay's receiver room, I really like it. It's got a lot of talented young guys. I just think the problem is they probably got about 4 or 5 decent guys that I like, but they're all like number 2, number 3 receivers. None of those guys scream number 1 receiver that you have to put your number 1 corner and game plan for. They're just a bunch of good, decent guys. But if you had a true number 1 guy to go with them and complement those guys, now you got a complete receiving core. And I think if DK Metcalf gets added to that room, like you said, that's the one guy that you can trust. I know Christian Watson has been the guy that they've hoped to become their number 1 receiver, but he's the guy that's always hurt. And then guys like Jaden Reed, who's pretty good, he gets hurt once in a while, and he's not probably a true number 1 receiver like DK Metcalf. So it makes a lot of sense. But you're already giving Jordan Love $55 million. They gave Josh Jacobs a decent contract. Can they afford DK Metcalf at $30 million? If they can, it does make a lot of sense.
I'll give you one more, and then we'll move on, because this one's more of a dream scenario than anything. But what about Baltimore? I think Baltimore could use a DK Metcalf, because weren't they like last in wide receiver yardage last year, if I'm not mistaken?
The receiver room's not really deep, and Zay Flowers and Bateman are good, but they get hurt a lot as well. So they don't really have anything outside of those guys.
So I think that would even be a more perfect scenario, I think, for DK Metcalf. Go to Baltimore, play with Lamar Jackson, who can throw the football and open up the field with his legs. Imagine that, having a DK Metcalf in Baltimore with Lamar. That would just be scary if he's healthy.
As a Bills fan and as a Josh Allen fan, it just thinks like, damn, like how much more does Baltimore and Lamar Jackson need to win a Super Bowl? I mean, we're sitting here with Khalil Shakir and James Cook, and Baltimore just gets Derrick Henry, and then they had DK Metcalf with Zay Flowers. But, man, that doesn't make a lot of sense. And, I mean, if you put DK Metcalf on the team, I mean, that's got to be one of the favorites. And if Lamar Jackson can't win with Derrick Henry and DK Metcalf, he's never going to win. And I think DK Metcalf could be the type of player to push that team over the edge. I mean, how do you game plan and stop DK Metcalf and Derrick Henry and Lamar all at the same time?
And also, well, I'll throw it out since you said it. I think Buffalo would also be a good place for DK. I think that would, because they need a wide receiver too. Like in the worst way, they need a wide receiver because of all the injuries they've had at the position. And trust me, they're set at their running back position with Cooks. He's going to be a great running back for many years to come. But they need a wide receiver, like a big name wide receiver. Diggs didn't cut it when he was there. Other guys didn't cut it when he was there. That would be perfect. Imagine getting to hear Josh Allen to DK Metcalf and having that weapon. I think that would be great too.
Yeah, that'd be perfect. And they do need another outside receiver to go along with Keon Coleman and Khalil Shakir in the slot. But unfortunately, Tyler Lockett wasn't the only player to get cut this week. We had a lot of cuts this week, Nick. We also had Davante Adams, who got cut. Joey Bosa recently got cut, which is no surprise. And Darius Slay, who I know he is on the older side, he got released as well. Before I give my thoughts on this, Nick, what were your thoughts on these cuts?
Well, there's some different scenarios here. I'll leave the Davante Adams one for last because I'm a Jet fan, but the Darius Slay one, if you saw some of the quotes and stuff that came out from Darius after he got cut by the Eagles, now you just said it. He's a little more on the older side, so it probably made sense not to pay him whatever his cap hit was going to be. But it almost sounded like he was a little butthurt going out the door of Philadelphia. Like, oh, well, Jalen Hurts is not the top quarterback. It's Lamar and Josh Allen. And I think he said another one, right? I can't remember who he said.
Burrow and Mahomes.
So don't get me wrong. All those guys are great. No doubt. But the guy just won a Super Bowl. Jalen Hurts just won a Super Bowl. You're telling me you're not going to put him up in the top 5 at least? I mean, Darius is just a little hurt that he got caught. Would you agree with me on that?
100%, Nick. And like you said before we started recording, does he say that if he's still a Philadelphia Eagle?
Hell no, he doesn't.
So, yeah, I think that was a little petty. And, yeah, it makes sense, though, for the Eagles. I mean, you just drafted Quinyon Mitchell, who looks like one of the best promising young corners. You got one of the best slot young corners in Cooper DeJean. You're obviously going to want to get another young guy to go along those guys. But Darius Slay being 34, 35 years old, I know cornerback, it's not a position that you see players play at an older age. I mean, look across this league. How many guys in the league who are over the age of 30 that played a cornerback position? I mean, it's one of the hardest, if not the second hardest position to play in the NFL outside of quarterback. You know, it's a position that relies so much on athleticism that as soon as you lose any speed or anything, you either got to switch to safety or you got to retire. So you don't see many cornerbacks playing in their 30s. And the fact that Darius Slay was able to play into 34, 35 at a Super Bowl level goes to show you he's already past that mark. But it makes sense for the Eagles to cut their ties. But, yeah, I think it was a little petty. When I look at the other two guys, obviously I said before, Davante Adams, it was just to save some salary cap. They're trying to go into a youth movement at the receiver position and overall roster. It'd be interesting to see, like I said, does he follow Aaron Rodgers to his next destination or does he go to another team? Pittsburgh, I think, would be a good fit, but I think Adams is still probably a number 1 receiver in this league and still got so many good years left. Joey Bosa, he's making a lot of money. He's old. He's hurt. Can't really play a full season.
He's always hurt.
The player that he used to be. I mean, when you look at his sack totals, he's not getting the same sack amounts that he used to be. So he's definitely a guy that the Chargers need to move on. They want to go younger at that position as well. And I would be interested to see if he goes and plays with the 49ers, who need a guy to play on the opposite side of his brother, Nick Bosa. I think that would be a perfect fit for Joey Bosa to go play with his brother. But what are your thoughts, Nick?
Yes, so I'll take the Joey Bosa one first. This has been rumored for the last 2 to 3 years at least that, we're going to move him. We're going to move him. We want to get out of the salary because they had to pay him a lot of money from what I understood. And it was just time. It was the Chargers, right? Let him go?
Yes.
Okay. So the Chargers, I think, had to make some moves to kind of reposition their roster a little bit. And he was making far too much money for the amount of injuries that he was facing. And they need to get someone in there who can be healthy and play the position. And so I think that one was mostly a injury slash salary slash. On the Davante Adams part, me being a Jets fan, you really had no choice. He had no business or room on this team. And I don't think he would have wanted to be there with Aaron Rodgers finally being gone. So they were able to get rid of him. The big thing that people forget, and you know this and I know this, no extra money on the contract. So when they cut him, it was a free $30 million on their salary cap. They didn't owe him. There was no guaranteed money left. So this was a clean, clear-cut move to clear $30 million in salary cap space. Now, what do they do with that money? Who knows? But for the Aaron Rodgers thing, this was a direct move off of Aaron Rodgers being gone, that Davante was going to leave. And to be honest, I don't know if Aaron Rodgers gets picked up. I'm throwing that out there, and people are going to call me crazy for it, but does anyone want to deal with the headache and the big megaphone that's going to be in their face every year? All right, it's time for my Tuesday appearance on the Pat McAfee show. Do you really think Mike Tomlin, who's one of the most buttoned-up coaches in the NFL, is going to want to deal with Aaron being on the Pat McAfee show every week? No. So directly, Davante Adams' move was directly based off of Aaron.
Yeah, I think the Pittsburgh move is interesting. Like you said, Mike Tomlin's not going to put up with that, but I wonder if that makes it a good fit. I mean, is Aaron Rodgers for 1 year just going to say, hey, I'm not going to do the Pat McAfee show? I know I got 1 year left in my career. I'm just going to, go to Pittsburgh for 1 year, just kind of follow what Mike Tomlin says. I mean, he knows following it the way he did, didn't get it nowhere in the Jets, and he doesn't want to go out like that. And it'd be interesting. I mean, if you put Aaron Rodgers and Davante Adams, if they are a package deal on the Steelers, with that defense and George Pickens and Mike Tomlin coaching them, that's a team that can go, to the second round of the playoffs.
Would that be stunting the growth of George Pickens? I'm not saying it necessarily would. I'm just throwing that out there as a possible scenario that if you bring in Davante Adams, which is taking catches away from George Pickens, and could that stunt the growth? George Pickens was already struggling last year and was not. Imagine if he actually played well last year. They might have had a chance last year. Now, part of that has to do with the quarterback situation in Pittsburgh. It was a dumpster fire, and they couldn't decide who the starter was. And they're still talking about bringing Russell Wilson back to be the quarterback of this team, which goes beyond my brain to figure out why they would bring him back. But I don't know. Pittsburgh would be a good fit. I think it would be a better fit for Aaron. I don't know if it would be a better fit for Davante Adams. But
yeah, I mean, I think they do. They could use a number 2 receiver. And I know you mentioned stunting his growth. I feel like it would help his growth. I mean, if you got a receiver who's struggling, I mean, he's getting double and triple teamed. You bring in Davante Adams, I feel like it's going to open it up more for him. And, if he's getting more catches and he's getting open more, that's only going to build up his confidence as a young receiver. I mean, look how much having T. Higgins on the other side helps a guy like Jamar Chase. I mean, they complement each other. Look how much a guy like Jalen Waddle helps a guy like Tyreek Hill. So sometimes you need that second guy to help a young receiver. And it'll be great because Davante Adams could come in there, have that veteran leadership to teach George Pickens the ropes. And then when Davante Adams leaves, George Pickens is that alpha male, and he's that veteran guy that can help out the young receivers that come in after. So I think it would make a lot of sense for both sides. And it doesn't seem like Mike Tomlin's going to leave Pittsburgh this year. So seems like they might all want to go all in for one more year with T.J. Watt, who is going to be 31 years old. So Pittsburgh might go all in one more year with a lot of older players on defense. And if you're going to go all in for 1 year, I think Davante Adams, Aaron Rodgers would make the most sense.
I feel like the Tomlin-Pittsburgh experience should have been over years ago. That's just my opinion of it, because it's just not taking them anywhere. And by the way, they won 10 games last year, and they should have gone further. Like, they had a chance. They had a chance to beat Baltimore, if I'm not mistaken, too, if I remember, in that game. And they just didn't. And I don't know, Pittsburgh's been kind of a disappointment for like the last, 6 to 7 years, at least, because everyone says, oh, they're winning games, they have a chance, and then they just get blown out in the playoffs. So
yeah, pretty much ever since Roethlisberger was last in a Super Bowl, for almost, like you said, the last decade, the Steelers have been a team who's always been really, really good in the regular season. No matter what you say in the preseason about how this is going to be if they fall off, Mike Tomlin always manages to get that team, 10 to 12 wins every single year. That's why he's never had a losing record. But like you said, Nick, they're constantly losing. At least they're making a second round of the playoffs. But now the trend is they're always losing the first round of the playoffs. Tomlin's getting them 10 wins and getting them to the playoffs. But like you said, it's only getting to the first run every year. And after doing that for 4 or 5 years, is it time to just rip off the Band-Aid, start a complete rebuild? And yeah, you may not make the playoffs. You may not make the first round for 5 years. But maybe in 5-6 years, you could freaking make, the second or third round of the playoffs. And ultimately, that's the goal.
Yeah. I mean, I think Tomlin is just so buttoned up that like it's just the same thing year after year after year. And if you're not going to change it up and hold these guys accountable, you're just never going to win anything.
The Football Forecast is presented by Playback. Watching sports is fun, but it's more fun with others. We spend way too much time watching it alone. Playback is a virtual space where communities can stream live sports together with everyone perfectly synced up. Creators can hop on stage, deliver their own play-by-play analysis and commentary, and invite viewers up for Q&A. Playback makes watching sports fully interactive and a social experience. From playing fantasy sports, from repping your favorite players and teams, and watching with the commentators and communities you care about. Win or lose, sports are best enjoyed together. Join our community by going to playback.tv/ETB network to find out more, including our live stream schedule. Now back to the show. But there were some players who got rewarded and didn't get released. They got contract extensions. Saquon Barkley and Maxx Crosby got paid. Both becoming the highest paid player at their position. Barkley getting a 2-year extension, which on an annual average salary is going to pay him $20.5 million, which obviously McCaffrey was in the 19 range. So Barkley's contract completely skyrocketed up, and he definitely deserves it. I mean, he's a guy who didn't have any help in the Giants, finally got to go to a good team in Philadelphia, took less money, won Offensive Player of the Year, won the Super Bowl, and now finally becomes the highest paid running back in the league, while also still being able to play for the defending Super Bowl champions, the Philadelphia Eagles. So Barkley definitely got everything he wanted and everything he frankly deserved. For Maxx Crosby, that's the one, like me and you said, Nick, before the show, that's the surprising one. Maxx Crosby was being talked in trade talks, and it seemed like he was going to get traded to a contender, and, he's sick of being in a losing culture. I wonder if Pete Carroll, who always has a winning culture and, pretty much wins wherever he goes, I wonder if he got Maxx Crosby to build in. And Pete Carroll's not going to be a guy who wants to rebuild. He's going to want to win now. And if you want to win now, you got to keep your best player on your roster. And they definitely rewarded him, making him the highest paid non-quarterback in football. So he definitely got a huge deal. But what were your thoughts, Nick?
So these are two completely different situations. One in Philadelphia where this made total sense in every way, shape, or form. And I'll talk about Howie Roseman being a genius. Again, this guy, was he named Executive of the Year? Because he should have been.
He should have been. He's the best by far.
He just knows how to spend money in the right way. That's one scenario. I'll come back to that one. The Maxx Crosby situation with the Raiders makes no sense at all whatsoever. So what was his deal? It was a 3-year, $100+ million deal, if I'm not mistaken.
It's like a 3-year deal for $35.5 million, which makes him $500,000 more per year more than Jefferson as the highest paid non-quarterback.
So it makes no sense for the Raiders at all. Now, were they trying to save face on their star player? So the agreement was $106.5 million over 3 years. So it makes no sense to me. You're not winning with him in the next 3 years. Let's just be real about that. Will he keep the team afloat and make them watchable? Yeah, he'll make them watchable because when he's not hurt, he is one of the sack leaders in all of the NFL. Actually, if he didn't get hurt last year, he probably would have been the sacks leader in the NFL at the pace he was going. But I'm surprised more on Maxx Crosby's end that he would sign a deal with the Raiders, unless he looked around in the market and said, I'm not getting that money anywhere else. I don't know. I'm just puzzled at the fact that Maxx Crosby would sign a deal with the Raiders. That's how I look at that one. Especially with no quarterback situation right now. That's another issue. I know you have Tom Brady in your ownership, so maybe people are more confident that he can get people to come to Las Vegas and play on the team. But all you have right now is Maxx Crosby, and that's it. The Saquon Barkley front, like I said, Howie Roseman is a genius. He figures it out, and the way I look at it is they signed him a year earlier than they had to, so it cost them less money if they had waited one more year and he were to hit free agency again. So they said, all right, Howie said, I'm going to pay him. Let me get it out of the way. And if he had another great year, I look like a genius because I already signed him to another extension on top of the deal that he already has. Is it a lot of money? Yeah. $20 million a year for a running back. When running backs are, what would you say, less than premium at this point? So he is a very rare breed that once he left New York, he figured it out. The Eagles are a great offensive line. That's why it worked out very well. The reason it didn't work out in New York, Swiss cheese offensive line. And that's why he would get hurt. This is the perfect offensive line. Howie Roseman knows what he's doing. I question Nick Sirianni at times as a head coach. And yes, I was the one with the quote that said he should have been fired but that they proved me wrong. But totally worth the extension for Saquon Barkley.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And to piggyback off you said with the Maxx Crosby, yes, it's a lot of money, when you're probably not going to be able to compete. But when you only got a couple good players on your roster, they probably got two elite players right now, one on offense, one on defense with Brock Bowers and Maxx Crosby. Well, Brock Bowers is on a rookie deal, so you're not paying him all that much. So when you only got one great player that you have to pay him. So they probably just figured, hey, we're not going to really be paying that many other great players. So let's just give Maxx Crosby extra money, for the fact that he's going to have to put up with this losing culture and be okay with losing. I think that's what it is. I think they're giving Maxx Crosby extra money so that he doesn't want to go to a contender and to kind of make up for the losing culture. But what I also think too is now I think this affects some other guys' contracts. I think, when you mention running backs, it's not a premium position, but I think with more NFL teams now playing these double two high safeties, I think we've seen more of a resurgence with running backs, and we've seen the success of guys like Josh Jacobs, Derrick Henry, James Cook. Running backs are more valuable now than they've been in the last decade, and I think that's why we're going to start seeing running backs get paid. Now, I think a running back that this affects is James Cook. Now, when James Cook first started his contract negotiations, he wanted $15 million. Now, there's market value, and what the Bills were, rumored to say were offering him was probably around the 10 or 11 million mark. Now, when you look at all the running backs at the time, you looked at Barkley. Barkley was only making 12 or 13 million. So you're like, well, you're not as good as Barkley. So we're not going to give you, James Cook, more money than Barkley. Well, now Barkley's making 20 and a half. So now I think James Cook's definitely going to get his $15 million per year. So he's going to get a boost in his contract. And now Jamar Chase, who wants to be the highest paid non-quarterback, he's going to get a bigger contract because now that Maxx Crosby just surpassed Justin Jefferson, now Chase is probably going to become the highest paid non-quarterback. And I would have to guess probably he's going to get close to $40 million a year. What do you think he's worth or not, Nick? He probably is going to get close to that $40 million a year mark. And he was the best receiver in football last year.
I just worry. I don't know. There's a lot of things I worry about with him, whether it's ego or wanting to be on the field and all the issues. First of all, I don't think they're going to pay him $40 million a year. I understand that's a big number. I understand that that's the rumor that's floating out there. You have to think about the salary cap, too, at $40 million a year. I understand that there are quarterbacks that make $40 million. I think Burrow makes in that realm, if I'm not mistaken. But how many guys can you afford at the $40 million a year mark? Your cap is going to get destroyed if you have two guys that have $40 million on it, and I know the NFL keeps raising the number every year, but they're not going to raise it to the point where you can fit two guys at 40 million or 50 million on your cap. So you got to think about that too. And also, to go to your point, we were comparing Chase and T. Higgins. What happened to T. Higgins again this year, which he's annoyed about? He got tagged again, and actually, I think you can only have 2 years in a row of a tag. Right. So they're going to have to make a choice after this coming year, either to sign him or let him go. So the Bengals are putting themselves in a more precarious spot in that scenario by giving him a tag. But I think that was to help with signing Jamar Chase this offseason to make sure they had the proper money. They needed to do that.
Yeah, and when you look at a guy like T. Higgins, I mean, he's going to want 25 to 30 million a year. Burrow's already making, I think, 55 million a year, and now you want Chase at 36 to 40 million a year. I know Burrow said he's going to talk about taking a pay cut, but he's going to have to take a significant pay cut to fit all those other guys. And I think, Nick, this is a perfect segue into probably the Bengals' best defensive player who wants a contract extension and may not be able to get it because how are they going to be able to pay everybody? And that's Trey Hendrickson. The Bengals granted his request for Trey Hendrickson to, get a trade and to seek a trade offer. So Trey Hendrickson now is going to be in trade talks. And for the Bengals, I mean, a team that you struggled on defense. The defense was the reason why you guys couldn't make it to the playoffs. You have one good player on defense, and that was Trey Hendrickson, who led the league in sacks. In my opinion, I think he should have been the defensive player of the year. I know they didn't make the playoffs, but a guy who played on a team that had nothing to still lead the league in sacks, I think that's got to mean something. But they're not going to be able to afford him. I know he's a guy who is in his early 30s, but he's a sack artist, and I feel like the Bengals can't afford to lose him. I think he's more important than T. Higgins because at least if you lose T. Higgins, you still got Jamar Chase, you still got Joe Burrow. You lose Trey Hendrickson, you got absolutely nobody. How is your defense going to get any better? And like I said, I know they can't afford everybody, but you know Sam Hubbard just retired as well, their other edge rusher. So how are you going to afford to lose both your edge rushers? So the Bengals are in a tough spot.
Yeah, the Bengals have been in a tough spot for the last couple of years, and that's why they're not winning a Super Bowl, because they can't put their team together 100% the right way, fitting the puzzle pieces together to make the correct team. Now, I'm looking at the Burrow contract. It's 5 years, $275 million. So you're right. It's about $55 million a year, I want to see him put his money where his mouth is and say, I'll take a pay cut. I'm waiting to see that come out officially, because if he doesn't take a pay cut, they're not signing, Chase, Higgins, and Hendrickson. There's no way that they're going to be able to afford those guys. And I'm trying to look up the Trey Hendrickson contract just because I'm curious on that front too. I don't know if he had like a long-term deal. Okay, so here it is. He's on a 1-year, $21 million deal. So he's a free agent going into next year. Is that what it is?
Yeah, he's got 1 year remaining.
Okay, so he's making $16 million. He made $16 million, or he's going to make $16 million this upcoming season, which is not a lot of money for the amount of work that he does on the field. But I wish, and this is another thing that bothers me too, I wish Joe Burrow would stop going on social media, stop saying, like, you need to sign T. Higgins, you need to sign Jamar Chase, you need to do this, you need to do that. Hey, Joe, are you putting up the money to do this? Like, no, it's a serious question. Like, because you just got paid. Like, big time you got paid. But I don't see you taking a pay cut. Unless I'm not seeing it right.
Yeah, and he's saying things like, oh, the salary cap doesn't exist, or the Philadelphia Eagles are able to make it work. They're able to re-sign all their players. So I don't see why we can't re-sign, me, Chase,
not the same,
and Higgins. I know Hendrickson's probably going to be the odd man out. So they're probably going to, out of all those guys, he's probably the least likely to resign. But like you said, all those guys can't get paid. Most likely, you're going to probably have to lose 2 of those 3 guys. You probably could only keep Burrow and Chase if Burrow doesn't take the pay cut. I think if Burrow takes the pay cut, then maybe you could keep Burrow, Chase, and Higgins. But you're definitely going to have to lose Trey Hendrickson. And like you said, and like I said, on a defense that had nothing but him, you lose him, you're going to be the worst defense in the league, and you're going to be in the same position next year as you were right now.
But here's the difference between the Eagles and the Bengals. Howie Roseman spends money the best out of any GM I've ever seen in the NFL. He plans his moves properly for the short term and for the long term, and will sign guys in advance to avoid paying them more in the future. And that's how he gets guys for value. The Bengals, on the other hand, they let guys' contracts expire, and then they end up in a situation where Jamar Chase is sitting out there all disgruntled. If you remember in this past offseason, how many games did he sit out because he was mad about his contract in the preseason? I mean, totally different schools of thought. So I think Burrow doesn't understand the difference between a GM that knows how to spend the money and a GM that he has that doesn't know how to.
And that's why Howie Roseman is the best GM in football, and the Bengals GM not so much. And he's going to have a huge task at hand. But the only way they're going to be able to keep any of these guys is Burrow decides to take a pay cut. If not, all you're going to have is Burrow and Chase, and that's not going to be enough. We also had some actual trade news as well. Christian Kirk got dealt to the Houston Texans. Now, obviously, Christian Kirk has been a guy who got a decent contract from the Jags, played really good in his first year, and then ultimately kind of declined after that. Honestly, this trade doesn't make sense for the Houston Texans. The Houston Texans need a guy opposite Nico Collins. Stephon Diggs is a free agent. He's old, and he's coming off a serious injury. Tank Dell's coming off a catastrophic injury that you don't know if he's ever going to come back. And even if he does, it's 2026, not 2025. So you needed another young guy. For Jacksonville, you got Brian Thomas Jr., who as a rookie became a top 10 receiver in the National Football League. But you are going to need another guy on the other side of him. I don't trust Gabe Davis, and they really didn't trust Christian Kirk as the season weighed on. They also released Evan Ingram as well, that they just came out in news. So this team is going to need a receiver, but you could pretty much almost say any position. The Jags need almost every position at this point. So it's going to be a long rebuild for the Jags, but at least they got Brian Thomas Jr. And like I said, the Texans got a receiver that they need. But what were your thoughts about this, Nick?
This is interesting. This guy, you and I were discussing this. Kirk had a really good beginning to his career with the Cardinals, and everyone thought he was going to be the next big wide receiver. Then, excuse me, the Jaguars overpaid. I remember it specifically. Like, the Cardinals didn't want to pay him, and the Jaguars swooped in for what, like $75, $80 million, if I remember correctly, and just they blew the market out, which was insane. And then you said, like, his first year, I think he had 1,100 yards, if I'm not mistaken, and then he's dropped off significantly in year 2 and year 3, and that's when the Jaguars finally said, not worth it. We're moving on. I don't know if this is a good move or a bad move, really, to be honest, for the Texans. CJ Stroud needs to play better, number one. He kind of had a little bit of a slump and didn't look good in the playoff game either. That was an embarrassment, what the Texans did in the playoffs. So I don't think this makes them better. I think this is more to have a veteran presence at the wide receiver position, which they needed somebody. Like you said, Tank Dell had a catastrophic injury of all sorts. So he's probably out all of next year, which is going to hurt them. But hopefully Nico Collins comes back and is healthy and can show what he can do on the field when he's healthy. And this is just more of a duct tape type move than a permanent move.
And Nick, do you think this puts a rest to the Texans being interested in re-signing Stephon Diggs now?
My opinion is I think all NFL teams should stay away from Stephon Diggs at this point. I think his ego and his injuries are damaged. And I think he needs almost retire, almost, in a sense. Like, I know it's not going to happen. Someone will sign him off his name value alone because that's what the NFL is. If a team is desperate enough for a wide receiver, they will find a way to fit him in, even if it's like a 1-year minimum salary situation. But Texans should stay away. Like, at all costs, just stay away.
Yeah, and with Stephon Diggs, if he does leave the Texans, I think interesting spot for him is he can stay in the same state and go play for his brother in Dallas. And that brings us to our next topic for the Dallas Cowboys who are on the news, Dak Prescott, who we've been speaking ad nauseum about his contract. Well, he did restructure his contract to give the Dallas Cowboys some salary cap relief. Now, he's not going to be making less money overall. It's just kind of pushing the money further down, and it kind of turned into a signing bonus. So his cap hit's lower this year, but his cap hit's going to be higher, obviously, in the future years. But he'll still be making the same amount of money. So it's not like he's taking less money. But it helps the Dallas Cowboys out now. But what are your thoughts about this, Nick?
This is not a surprise. I think the Cowboys finally said to themselves, oh, shit, we gave him too much money when we signed him to a deal. And now we got to take. When you hear restructured, that's basically a nice way of saying, oh, I paid you too much money. That's what a restructure basically means. I know most people don't want to believe that when they hear it, but they paid him too much. He got hurt during the season, which basically, I shouldn't say basically, it did end their season because they just didn't have a backup quarterback that was going to step in. All the eggs are in the Dak Prescott basket, as bad as that sounds. So I think they restructured his deal. They restructured CeeDee Lamb's deal. And I think that saved them, about like $60 million or $70 million in cap space, which is a lot of money to restructure, by the way. And they now, I don't know, I could be wrong about this. I think part of that restructuring has to do with the Micah Parsons contract situation coming up, which they have to sign him. That's not even a debatable point. They need him on the defensive side of the ball. He is probably one of the best at his position to play the game. Now, do you want to put up with his ego? Do you want to put up with like what he does, like what McAfee does, where Micah does a podcast for Bleacher Report, so you have to listen to the constant bashing that he does on people? No. And I said this back on the show last year even. I said that they should put a stipulation in that he can't do the podcast if we're going to pay him more money. But I don't know if Micah would ever agree to that at all. But it's basically the way I look at this restructure is they want money to sign Micah Parsons.
Yeah, and I mean, come on, Nick. You know the new trend is for all these athletes now to have their own podcast. So we can't tell players not to have podcasts. It's all about freedom of speech. But no, I'm just joking.
Right, but I don't mean it necessarily that way. Maybe I mean like during the regular season, we focus on football, which a lot of teams are trying to get their players to do on any sport. Hey, let's not do a podcast during the season. Like, it takes away, and then you hurt people's feelings and egos during the season. Not that I'm crossing sports for a second, but look at what Paul George is doing right now. He put the podcast on hold because it was such a distraction for the 76ers. I think this was the same thing. The podcast is going to be a distraction for the Cowboys, the way it looks.
Yeah, I definitely agree, Nick. But yeah, they got to re-sign Micah Parsons, and he's another guy. I mean, if Maxx Crosby is going to get $35.5 million, I mean, where does that put Micah Parsons' number? Because I mean, I think when Micah Parsons is healthy, he might be just as good, if not actually better than Maxx Crosby. So he's going to be looking at a guy that's going to get a lot of money. I think the Dallas Cowboys were able to re-sign their defensive tackle. I think they gave him almost $20 million a year, so they were able to re-sign him. But the Cowboys got a lot of money to negotiate, and it sucks that you gave Prescott $60 million, and that was the mistake that they made.
The one thing I want to say also is it seems like the Dallas Cowboys are always late to signing somebody first, if you know what I'm talking about, where if now that they didn't sign him before Maxx Crosby, basically Mike is going to say, thank you very much. That means I'm going to get more than Maxx Crosby. Now, look at the CeeDee Lamb situation. More contracts came in. CeeDee Lamb got paid more. So Dallas and timing just does not work out.
They did the same thing when Prescott got his first contract. They kept delaying and delaying it, and then instead of being able to get him for like $30 million, they got him for over 40. And now his second contract, they had to give him over 60. So Cowboys don't give all their contracts, in a timely manner. And I would say they do the exact opposite that the Philadelphia Eagles and Howie Roseman do.
And they're in division, so it makes it worse.
And that's why one team has been in the Super Bowl the last 3 years, and why another team hasn't been in the conference championship in over 25. But we did have some NFL things going on. We had the NFL scouting combine, the 2025 scouting combine this week. Unfortunately, there was a lot of players that didn't participate. And I think, Nick, it's starting to become a trend to where if you're a top player at your position, you just have everything to lose and nothing to gain by going to the scouting combine. If everybody already says you're fast, if everybody already says you're strong, everybody already says you could come in and play good and you're a top player position, why would you go and run a 40 and then for them to be like, oh, he's a little slower than we thought, or he's a little weaker than we thought? If you're an established player, you have nothing to gain and everything to lose. And I think that's why you're seeing the top players at their position to say, hey, we're just going to go do team interviews. We'll meet with the medical staffs, talk to teams, and we're going to do everything on our pro days where you're in a controlled environment with your teammates you've been playing with for 4 or 5 years. And that makes the most sense. But you also had some injured guys as well who did want to participate. But what were your thoughts about how many players didn't do the combine this year?
So most of it was the big guys that are going to be drafted in the first 5 to 10 picks. I'm surprised. I'm not surprised that they didn't go. One, they want to be careful they don't hurt themselves going and throwing and all that stuff, except for Abdul Carter, who is now hurt or was hurt going into the draft, even though I think his media obligation or whatever was a little cocky when he was talking to the media saying, I'm going to be the number 1 overall pick, even though I'm hurt. Now, he's a really good player, a really, really good player. But I don't know if he'll be number 1 overall because teams are not going to want to pay that money at the number 1 overall pick. But just, it makes sense. So, like, Shedeur Sanders was not going to throw. I don't think he had anything left to prove, so to speak. And then Cam Ward, who's going to be probably the second quarterback off the ranking. He's a really good quarterback. I don't think he has anything to prove by throwing footballs at the scouting combine. And this is an opinion I've had for a while about the combine. And if I'm wrong, tell me. But I'm almost starting to think that the scouting combine doesn't have the value that it once did years ago.
No, I don't think it does. I think it's more just just to confirm what teams saw on tape. Like I said, if you see a player who's fast on game tape, you want to make sure that he's actually fast when he's running. But like you said, you see a lot of guys who have great combines and then ultimately don't turn out to be great players. I think right now what the combine is going to turn into, it's going to turn into all those guys who are maybe not the best at the position, are kind of like middle to fringe first round picks, and they're kind of solidifying their stats as a first round pick. There were some guys who stood out to me. I got to talk about the safety from South Carolina, Nick Imaraworu. The guy is 6'3", over 220 pounds, and he ran over under a 4.3. He ran a 4.38, and he had a 40-inch vertical. I mean, this guy is way bigger, way faster, and way stronger than Kyle Hamilton and Derwin James. I mean, when you look at this guy, this guy is like DK Metcalf playing safety. I mean, him and DK Metcalf are almost the same height and weight and speed. That's how insane it is. So, this guy has moved up to, probably a top 10, top 15 pick, and you don't see safeties that can move like that. He's essentially a guy who's built like a linebacker, but that can cover. So, this guy's going to be a huge chess piece to any team that drafts him. A couple other players that stood out was Jahdae Barron from Texas. He had a great combine. He was over 6 foot and ran a 4.3, and a guy who was really good in zone coverage and had a really breakout season for Texas. Solidified himself as a first-round pick. You had Stewart, the defensive end from Texas A&M, and you had Landon Jackson, the defensive end from Arkansas. Both those guys came in at over 6'6", over 265 pounds, and both of the guys were running in the 4.5s. So that's obviously elite speed for guys that are over 260 pounds, and they both had 40-inch verticals. The only guys that ever really do that are guys like Myles Garrett. So both those guys that became first-round picks. Matthew Golden, the receiver from Texas, he became the number 1 receiver for Texas this year, and then went to the combine and ran a 4.2. So he established himself as a first-round pick. And then you also had Maxwell Harrison, who looked really good. Darian Porter, the cornerback from Iowa State, 6'3", running a 4.3 at corner. The two disappointing guys were Will Howard. He really struggled with his accuracy. I don't think he did him any favors. And Tej Johnson, the receiver from Oregon, he weighed 154 pounds and ran under over a 4.5. That's really slow for a guy who's 154 pounds. We saw Xavier Worthy, who was 165 pounds last year, run a 4.2. So that was no good at all. So that was my thoughts about the combine.
Yeah, the combine is interesting because I feel like when you look at the combine now as opposed to like 5-10 years ago, the guys that go to the combine now want to raise their draft stock up because they're going in front of all the scouts and all the teams, all the GMs, the management. So any guy that's going and physically throwing or taking the hits or taking the targets, they want to raise their value from like a 3rd round to a 2nd round or a 2nd round to a 1st round. Any guys that are not actually going, that are the names, they already know that they're going to be drafted at the top. So there's no need. I don't want to say they have to, but no need for them to actually be there, to be honest. Because like you mentioned before, where they're there to talk to management, what stops them in today's society from having video calls or doing all that stuff virtually? They really could if they wanted to. And again, people are going to say, but you need live interaction. You don't want to do it all over video. But like, give me a break. We live in a remote society now where we interview and we do jobs and we do all this stuff. So the scouting combine is interesting, but it's not the same interesting that it was 5-10 years ago, where every big name threw or took passes at the combine. So that, I guess, it's changed. It's different how the combine is used now.
Yeah, and I guess one news that did break was there was talks about the number 1 pick being potentially discussed as being traded. I guess the New York Giants were potentially interested in trading up to number 1. And I guess the rumors are out there is maybe the Giants are in love with Cam Ward. I know Cam Ward kind of fits the style of Brian Daboll, who coached Josh Allen and likes that guy who could throw those crazy sideline passes and has the crazy arm strength and can move and has legs. So it makes sense, but it's going to cost them a lot to go to move up in the draft to get him. But what were your thoughts on those trade talks, Nick?
Yeah, the Giants need a lot of help, not just the quarterback. They need to redo a lot of things. Now, they have, obviously, their stud in Malik Neighbors, who's going to be a number 1 wide receiver for many, many years, as long as he stays healthy. But they don't have much else. To be quite honest, they don't have a running back right now. They don't have another wide receiver, excuse me, that they need. They need a quarterback. They need to figure that out. I think all the reports say that they're in love with Cam Ward. That's the guy that they want. That guy can throw the football like amazing in the air, like deep passes. He is great. So that fits what they need. That's why they were going after Stafford originally, because Stafford throws bombs down the field. That's the type of guy they wanted. And if I'm not mistaken, the report said that they actually offered more in a contract to come to New York than what he took in a restructure to stay with the Rams. So I think the problem is no one wants to play in New York for either New York team right now because of all the embarrassment that's going on both sides, and the New York media doesn't help it either. So that's kind of the Giants scenario. Will they make the move? I say it's more on the Giants than the Jets. I think the Giants would move up and make the deal. I don't know what the Jets. I think the Jets have the 7th overall pick currently right now.
They definitely have to give up a lot more. I mean, the Giants could probably go from 3 to 1, but maybe just giving up a 1 next year. But the Jets, they're going to have to give up multiple ones. I mean, it's going to be a similar situation to when the Washington Redskins at the time traded up for RG3 and had to give up 3 first-round picks. Nick, if as a Jets fan, are you willing to do that for a guy like Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders?
It's tough because desperately we need to do something. We need a Hail Mary, so to speak. If I were to get a Cam Ward, I like Cam Ward. I think Cam Ward is going to be amazing. Once he gets his reps and he's comfortable in the NFL, he's going to be a air-it-out type quarterback that can be really good. I don't know if I'd trade 3 first-round picks. That's a lot of capital in NFL terms. Maybe 2 I would probably trade, and then I would work my way from there. Because once you have a quarterback, then you can find other guys that want to play with you. Right now, the Jets have nothing. Literally air. It's a bunch of air. That's it. There's nothing there in the spot for the quarterback. So they have $30 million in cap space. They could go out and get a quarterback, but no veteran quarterback's going to come play there either because they don't have any pieces at all. So the Giants are going to get it. If they want it, they'll make the move.
Yeah, I agree, Nick. And to that Jets point with the quarterback, look at Washington. As soon as you get the quarterback like Jayden Daniels, everything seems to just fall in place and everything just seems to be much easier. What are you going to say?
No, I think you're 100% right. Having Jayden Daniels is everyone's going to want to play with Jayden Daniels. Everyone is going to want to play with Patrick Mahomes. I mean, because they're the guys. Everyone, they know that they're going to be consistent every year. Even though Mahomes didn't win the Super Bowl, would you put it past them again next year to be in the Super Bowl again? I wouldn't. Are they not as good a team as they were in the first couple? Yeah, but Mahomes always finds a way. And I think Jayden Daniels is going to be the same way. He was very close to winning. And they could have been in the Super Bowl, for all we know. So if you can find a guy, if the Jets and the Giants can find a quarterback that's trustworthy, that everybody likes, they'll be the next one to get all the moves. But until that actually happens, the jury's out.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. That's going to do it for this show. We do got one thing to bring up. We said you got NFL free agency coming up, and this will be our last show before free agency. Obviously, we'll be breaking down the free agent signings again next Friday. But what we have to talk about is our live stream coming up on Wednesday. We have a live stream coming up for ETB Network NFL Free Agency live stream, which is going to be on March 12th at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 3 p.m. Pacific, and it's going to be presented by Playback. We're going to be breaking down all the free agent signings. I know free agents are going to be going on before that time, but obviously, we need to make sure everybody gets home from work, maybe grab a little bite to eat beforehand. And then obviously, it starts off a little slow. So by 6 o'clock when we go live, there's going to be plenty of news to talk about. There's going to be so many free agent signings, and I can't wait. So I know we're going to have Nick on the show. We're going to have plenty of other people. Some Chicago Bears fans are going to be on the show. So anything that you want to see, we're going to break it down. So definitely make sure to tune in. And that's going to do it here for episode 3 of the Offseason show. Make sure to tune in next week. See ya.
See you guys. Have a good week.